4, 3, 2.
Good afternoon. I'm Myron Belkind, past president of the National Press Club, a retired international bureau chief for the Associated Press, and a professorial lecturer at the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. Today is a very special day at the National Press Club because this is the first in-person newsmaker the club is hosting since the pandemic began in early 2020, and we have appropriately a very special guest, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, the opposition leader of Belarus. Her visit to Washington comes amid continuing protests in Belarus and intensifying government attacks on independent media since last year's presidential election. That evidence indicates Tsikhanouskaya won by an overwhelming majority of the popular vote against incumbent Alexander Lukashenko, who has ruled since 1994. She has appealed to Western nations to recognize her as the winner of the election and to impose stronger sanctions against the Lukashenko regime. She's in Washington this week to meet leaders of the Biden administration and congressional lawmakers. Belarus has been in the spotlight since the controversy over the election last August led to unprecedented protests that brought hundreds of thousands of Belarusians into the streets for weeks. International attention reached a crescendo 2 months ago when Lukashenko ordered the forced landing of an international airliner in Belarusian airspace and arrested a dissident journalist, Roman Protasiewicz, and his girlfriend, Sofia Sapega, who were on board the flight. The Committee to Protect Journalists last Thursday called on Belarusian authorities to cease raids on independent news outlets and press freedom groups and refrain from charging or imprisoning journalists over their work. The very next day, Belarusian security forces kept up their attacks on the media, raiding the offices and homes of several independent journalists and the premises of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty in Minsk. Our guest today did not plan to become the leader of the opposition in Belarus. She stepped into that role after her husband was arrested after he announced plans to run for president against Lukashenko last year. He remains in prison while our guest today was forced to flee Belarus with her 2 young children into exile in neighboring Lithuania. I will now call on Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya to deliver her remarks, and that will be followed by a question and answer session. To ask questions of our guests, please fill out your questions on the cards available to you and forward them to the front of the room. And if any of you are watching this newsmaker online, and we understand many are watching online, you may submit your questions via headliners@press.org. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, the floor is yours, and you can do your remarks from where you're sitting.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Dear friends, this is my first visit to the USA, and I'm really honored to be in your great country, and I'm grateful for the US leadership for receiving me in such an extraordinary high level. I already had a chance to meet with Undersecretary Victoria Nuland and State Secretary Blinken. Those in diaspora, I saw experts from Atlantic Council. And 1 moment ago, I had a meeting with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and we spoke about repressions of the regime and the peaceful fight of Belarusians. And my team had substantial negotiations with the State Department teams on sanctions and assistance to Belarus, and we feel the support from the US, and we want this support to make this most effective. And I'm really glad that Belarus topic unites all the branches of power and both parties. I will meet you as senators from both parties, including those who are mostly involved in the situation with Belarus, like Senators Menendez, Rich, Shafin, and Portman. And also I will participate in the lunch on the Friends of Belarus caucus in the House. And we also work hard to open similar caucus here in the Senate. We understand that only Belarusians themselves can bring the country to democratic changes, but we hope that America will show active and just not symbolic actions. And President Biden says that the world now is struggling between autocracy and democracy. And so Belarus is on the front line of this fight at the moment. Is as the champions in this fight, in different values, you can help get things done. We are sure that Belarus will become success story and precedent example for others. Belarus will be an example of the transition from autocracy to democracy in the near future. And we are fighting hard, and we welcome all the democratic countries to join this fight.
Well, thank you. You're at the National Press Club, and so it is appropriate that I should ask a few questions related to the media. Considering the intensifying crackdown on journalists and news media in Belarus, even more intense than in the past year, what should the United States and the EU do to help and support Belarusian independent media and to penalize Lukashenko's regime for his actions regarding the press?
Well, first of all, we have to raise attention to this problem, because usually mass media are considered to be like untouchable in the world, because even in the countries where war is going on or in hot points, journalists doing their job, and they can't be prosecuted, they can't be jailed. But in Belarus the situation is different. Lukashenko and his cronies take revenge on mass media that dared to fulfill their job, showing the truth, showing demonstrations, and he's destroying mass media in our country. And of course we need huge assistance to those journalists, to those mass media, telegram channels, YouTube channels that had to flee the country because of their persecution, because of violence, and assist them with financial support, because it's crucial for this fight to the whole world to see those pictures that astonished the whole world in the previous months, and continue to follow the situation. So just talk about this problem in Belarus and try to assist to those people from mass media.
We heard in the post-election protests last year that the Kremlin sent in some of its propagandists from its state television channels to help Lukashenko's state TV. And of course, Russia has conducted military exercises there, and there's talk of permanent bases. What do you know about how much control the Kremlin is exerting over Lukashenko at this point?
I don't really know how much control he has, but of course this so-called friendship is rather strange between President of Russia and ex-President of Belarus, and we understand that we have to fight, we are fighting inside country. This is not fight against Russia or against other countries. It's not pro-Russian or pro-Western fight, it's fight between the past and the future. And we have to send clear messages to Kremlin that you can play a constructive role in solving the Belarusian crisis, just don't interfere into our internal policy, don't send propagandists, don't send military forces and all this stuff, just reflect like this is our problem and we have to solve this problem by ourselves with support of democratic countries that, standing up for human rights, for values, for democratic values, for rule of law is not interference into policy, but normal adequate reaction of democratic countries.
Are you concerned that your meetings with Western officials might make it harder for Mr. Putin to dump Lukashenko because he doesn't want to be seen bowing to Western demands?
It's strange to me that you're asking about Putin at all. We have to talk about Belarus here. I came with the problem of the regime prevails in our country, and the USA has to can send clear messages to Russia that our independence is not a trade. Our sovereignty is our highest value, and all the deals that understand between these two people at the moment, they will be reviewed in the future. And that Russia shouldn't interfere into our inner policy. This is the only contact that we can discuss Russia.
You referred in your opening remarks to your meetings with various officials in the Biden administration. Could you just elaborate on, after having those meetings, do you feel better than when you came here to meet them? And the Washington Post today had an editorial urging President Biden to meet you. Are there any plans for you to meet the president?
I knew that we have allies among in administration of the USA, and our aim was update information in Belarus, coordinate our actions to explain what's the peculiarities of the situation in Belarus, and of course I was met very warmly by administration, and we just talked about assistance to civil society, about more pressure on the regime, and about justice, about democratic values, and we did our job together. We coordinated our actions. I didn't meet with President Biden. This meeting wasn't scheduled, but who knows, maybe we will have a chance.
Again, since we're at the National Press Club, how do you view your plans for the future should you, your husband, your party, your supporters come to power? How will you treat the press as a governing force in Belarus?
Press should be independent in any country. They don't have to have any obstacles that prevent them to show the truth, even if it's against government. Their job is to show the truth without any evaluations. And journalists shouldn't be under attack at no way. They have to do their job, good job, and shouldn't be behind the bars as it's now in Belarus.
Getting more questions, and we have many people outside of the press club sending in questions. And let me just say, since we're running out of time, do you think the United States, the EU, and other countries have responded strongly enough to Lukashenko's forcing of the Ryan airplane to land in Minsk, since that really regenerated the press coverage of what's happening in Belarus?
The USA rather fast imposed sanctions on Lukashenko, and from their election day, when the USA declared that Lukashenko is illegitimate, this already was a very strong message. And the USA is having consistent policy towards Belarus, and sanctions were imposed. Now we see that Lukashenko escalates violence, and it needs such sanctions, maybe sectoral sanctions from the USA, and I think that only united response, joint position of the USA, European Union, United Kingdom, Canada can put powerful hit on Lukashenko's regime. For me, Solis is my beloved person behind the bars. Solis, we have a lot of relatives and friends in jail now, suffering and being humiliated morally and physically. It's never enough for us. Until we come for new elections, we will need more and more actions from the country.
Thank you. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, it's a tradition at the National Press Club when we have world leaders come to this club, which we consider the leading professional organization for journalists, that we present our visiting leaders the National Press Club coffee mug. And it's appropriate again to quote the Washington Post today. They referred to you today as Belarus's rightful leader. So please take this with you and to see you again in the future.
I just wanted to say great thank you for all the journalists that are talking about those, writing about those, for your interest, because it's extremely important to speak about us, and I'm really grateful for your job.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
That's the point. Stabilize it. There's yourself.